The deafening roar of laughter echoed off the marble walls of the academy cafeteria, completely drowning out the sound of a boy's breaking heart. Ethan stood frozen in the center of the room, his jaw tight and his fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned stark white. A camera phone was shoved mere inches from his face, the recording light blinking like a warning siren. Behind the lens stood Julian, the school's wealthiest and most ruthless trendsetter, flashing a smile that dripped with absolute cruelty. "Seriously, Ethan." Julian's voice boomed over the crowd, perfectly projecting for his live stream. He panned his camera down to Ethan's feet, zooming in on the frayed, desperately duct-taped soles of his battered sneakers. "Did you fish those out of a toxic waste dumpster? Because even the trash can wouldn't want them?" Another wave of hysterical, mocking laughter erupted from the surrounding students. Ethan's vision blurred with hot, humiliating tears. He didn't defend himself. He couldn't. Instead, he ducked his head, shoved past the crowd, and bolted for the exit, leaving Julian to soak up the hollow adoration of his followers. But as Julian proudly hit post on the humiliating video, chasing 30 seconds of cheap viral fame, he was entirely unaware of the devastating truth. He had no idea that those torn-up shoes were carrying a burden heavier than anyone could ever imagine. And he had absolutely no idea that a chance encounter at the city hospital that weekend was about to shatter his arrogant reality forever. Julian Sterling didn't just walk the pristine, sunlit hallways of Crestmont Academy. He reigned over them. To Julian, high school was not an educational institution, it was a runway. A daily red carpet where your worth was strictly measured by the retail value of the fabric on your back. His kingdom was built on a foundation of luxury designer labels, limited edition accessories, and, above all else, a meticulously curated social media presence. Today, Julian was the undeniable center of attention. He was sporting the Apex Novas, a pair of high-top sneakers so incredibly rare that they had sold out globally in 14 seconds. He had paid a private broker $3,000 in cash just to get them 3 days early. As he strutted toward his locker, his phone was already in his hand, live streaming to his thousands of followers as sycophantic classmates parted like the Red Sea to let him through. "It's about the drip," Chet Julian said smoothly into his camera, flipping his perfectly styled hair. "If you aren't stepping into the room looking like $1,000,000, you might as well stay home. Know your worth." On the absolute opposite end of the Crestmont Academy social spectrum was Ethan Caldwell. If Julian was the blazing sun, Ethan was a ghost. He was there on a strict academic scholarship, a fact that already made him an outcast among the ultra-wealthy student body. Ethan walked with a permanent slouch, his shoulders heavy and dark. Purple, exhausted bags bruised the skin beneath his eyes. He always wore the same faded, generic gray hoodie, keeping his head down and avoiding eye contact. But the most glaring offense, in Julian's fiercely judgmental eyes, was Ethan's footwear. Ethan wore a pair of off-brand canvas sneakers that were quite literally falling apart. The fabric was stained and frayed. The shoelaces were knotted together where they had snapped, and the rubber soles were peeling away from the base like dead skin. They were held together by haphazard, desperate strips of thick silver duct tape. During first period AP Economics, the stakes of Julian's obsession with clout began to escalate. Julian sat in the back row, his Apex Novas propped arrogantly on the desk so the entire room could admire them. His two closest friends, Dax and Kalen Boys, whose only personality trait was agreeing with whatever Julian said, were hyping up his live stream. 10 minutes after the bell rang, the heavy oak door creaked open. Ethan stumbled in, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. As he hurried toward an empty desk, his duct-taped shoe caught on the edge of a floor tile. He tripped forward, catching himself on Julian's desk. Julian recoiled as if Ethan had just handed him a live grenade. He violently wiped down his desk where Ethan's hand had touched. "Watch it, Caldwell." Julian scoffed loudly, ensuring the entire class could hear him. "You're going to infect my novas with poverty? Do you need a map to the nearest landfill? Or did you already get those shoes from there?" A few kids snickered. Ethan didn't fight back. He just muttered a raspy, exhausted apology, sank into his seat, and immediately rested his heavy head on his folded arms. Falling asleep before the teacher even finished writing on the chalkboard, Dax nudged Julian, pointing at Julian's phone screen. "Bro, your viewers are loving the shoe roasts. You should do a shoe check on Ethan in the cafeteria. It would pull crazy numbers." Julian looked at his viewer count. It was stagnating. He needed viral engagement to secure a brand deal he had been chasing. He looked over at Ethan's battered, taped-up sneakers. In Julian's superficial mind, Ethan wasn't a tired, struggling human being. He was just a prop, a stepping stone for Julian's digital fame. Julian justified it easily to himself. If you can't afford to look the part, you shouldn't be going to a school like Crestmont. He's bringing down the prestige of the academy. When the lunch bell rang, the trap was officially set. The cafeteria was a massive, echoing hall of wealth, filled with catered lunches and loud, confident teenagers. Ethan sat completely alone at a small, cramped table in the far corner. He was meticulously eating a very meager, homemade sandwich wrapped in a paper towel, studying a battered chemistry textbook while chewing slowly to make the small meal last. Julian marched across the cafeteria, his phone raised, the recording light glowing an ominous red. Dax and Kalen flanked him, signaling for the surrounding tables to quiet down and watch the spectacle. The tension in the room skyrocketed as dozens of students pulled out their own phones. Sensing the impending drama, Julian slammed his hand down on Ethan's table, violently startling the exhausted boy. "What's up, Crestmont?" Julian yelled into his phone, his voice booming over the sudden silence of the hall. "We're doing a surprise shoe check. Let's see who's stepping fresh and who's stepping ... foul." He flipped the camera around, shoving it mere inches from Ethan's face. Ethan flinched, holding a hand up to block the glare of the lens. "Seriously, Ethan?" Julian mocked, projecting his voice for maximum humiliation. He forcefully kicked Ethan's chair back, exposing the boy's duct-taped shoes to the entire room. "Hey Ethan, did you find those in a dumpster? Because honestly, even the trash can wouldn't want them. I think my grandfather threw a pair just like that away in 1995. The cafeteria erupted. The sound of 100 teenagers laughing hysterically bounced off the walls. Dax and Kalen were howling, slapping high fives. Julian zoomed in on the silver duct tape, relishing the exploding viewer count on his screen. The little hearts and laughing emojis flooded his feed in real time. Ethan's face burned a deep, fiery red. The humiliating laughter surrounded him, pressing in on him from every side, suffocating him. He looked down at his ruined shoes. Shoes he had to wear because there simply wasn't a single spare dollar in his life for anything else. He didn't have the energy to explain. He didn't have the energy to fight. With trembling hands, Ethan shoved his half-eaten sandwich into his backpack. He didn't look at Julian. He didn't look at the cameras. He just shoved his way through the laughing crowd, bolting for the cafeteria exit and disappearing into the hallway, fighting back a wave of devastating tears. Julian turned back to his phone, flashing a brilliant $1 million smile. "That's how we do it, chat. Keep those likes coming." Julian felt on top of the world. He had secured his viral moment. He felt absolutely zero remorse for the boy he had just publicly destroyed. He was completely blinded by his own ego, wholly unaware that in less than 48 hours, the universe was going to force him to look past the surface, and the heartbreaking truth he was about to discover would shatter his arrogant reality forever. The cafeteria incident wasn't just a fleeting moment of cruelty. For Julian, it was a massive success. By the time the final bell rang that afternoon, the video of Ethan's humiliation had blown past 50,000 views. Julian's follower count spiked, and he finally received the coveted direct message from the luxury streetwear brand he had been desperately trying to court. They offered him a minor sponsorship deal. To Julian, the brutal mocking of a defenseless classmate was simply the cost of doing business. Over the next 2 days, the social atmosphere at Crestmont Academy became a living nightmare for Ethan. The viral video had painted a massive target on his back. Every time he walked down the hallway, students would dramatically pull out rolls of duct tape, laughing hysterically and offering to fix his shoes. Others would throw crumpled up pieces of trash at his feet, loudly asking if he wanted to add to his wardrobe. Through it all, Ethan remained completely silent. He kept his head down, gripping his backpack straps tightly, his bruised eyes focused solely on the floor. He never retaliated, which only fueled Julian's arrogant belief that Ethan was just pathetic. On Friday afternoon, the stakes reached a critical turning point. Julian was holding court by his locker, surrounded by his usual audience, including Dax and Kaylin. The sponsor deal required Julian to post one more engagement video by the end of the week, and he knew exactly what the internet wanted: more drama. As if on cue, Ethan turned the corner, walking heavily toward the library. He looked worse than ever. His face was pale, and he was dragging his feet, the duct tape on his left shoe tearing slightly with every step. Dax elbowed Julian, holding up a brand new roll of heavy-duty silver duct tape he had bought specifically for a joke. "Yo, Julian, round 2. The comments section is begging for an update on the trash can kicks." Julian looked at the tape, then at Ethan. A tiny, almost imperceptible sliver of hesitation pinched at Julian's chest. The way Ethan was walking, he looked completely broken. There was a raw, undeniable sadness radiating from the boy that momentarily penetrated Julian's ego. For a split second, Julian had a choice. He could ignore Dax, let Ethan walk to the library in peace, and find another way to make a viral video. He could choose empathy over clout. But then Julian's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a notification from the streetwear brand, reminding him of his deadline. Julian chose the clout. He chose the betrayal. This was the point of no return. "Hit record," Julian commanded. Snatching the roll of duct tape from Dax's hand, Julian sprinted down the hallway, cutting Ethan off right before he reached the library doors. Julian slid smoothly into Ethan's path, holding the duct tape up like a trophy, while Dax trailed behind him, phone camera recording every humiliating second. "Hold up, Caldwell," Julian announced loudly, his voice echoing down the corridor. A crowd instantly formed, sensing the impending entertainment. "I saw the left shoe giving out on you. But don't worry, bro. Since you clearly can't afford a trip to the mall, I brought the mall to you." Ethan stopped dead in his tracks. He looked up, his exhausted eyes meeting Julian's. There was no anger in Ethan's gaze, only a profound, desperate pleading. "Julian, please," Ethan whispered, his voice incredibly hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in days. "Just leave me alone. I don't have time for this today. I really don't." "Time for what?" "Free charity," Julian mocked, fully performing for the camera. He dramatically peeled off a long, sticky strip of the silver tape. "Stick your foot out, Ethan. Let the master cobbler fix those garbage scows you call sneakers." The crowd of students laughed, pulling out their own phones to capture the sequel to the viral hit. "I said leave me alone," Ethan said, his voice cracking. He tried to step around Julian, but Dax and Kaylin blocked his path, trapping him against a row of lockers. "Oh, come on, don't be ungrateful," Julian sneered, stepping closer. In a sudden, aggressive move, Julian knelt down and forcefully slapped the long strip of duct tape directly across the top of Ethan's shoe, intentionally sticking it to the boy's frayed pant leg as well. Ethan panicked, He jerked his leg back, violently, trying to pull away. The sudden movement caused the already weakened fabric of the shoe to rip entirely. The sole detached completely from the toe, flapping uselessly against the linoleum floor. The hallway went completely silent for 1 second, before erupting into absolute, deafening hysterics. Julian stood up, laughing so hard, he had to lean against the lockers. "Oh man, total blowout. I guess you can't tape garbage back together after all. You better hop home, Caldwell." Ethan stood frozen, staring down at his ruined shoe. The protective layer was gone. His frayed sock was completely exposed to the cold floor. The absolute cruelty of the moment hit him like a physical blow. The small, desperate defense he had maintained all week completely shattered. He didn't run this time. He just stood there, tears finally spilling over his dark eyelashes, cutting clear tracks through the exhaustion on his face. "You have no idea," Ethan choked out, his voice trembling so violently that the laughter around him finally began to die down. "You have absolutely no idea what these shoes mean." He didn't wait for Julian to respond. Ethan bent down, ripped the flapping, ruined sole completely off, and began walking down the hallway. He walked with a heavy, agonizing limp, 1 foot in a sneaker, the other stepping solely on his sock. He looked pathetic. He looked entirely broken. Julian watched him go, the camera still rolling. The video was guaranteed to go viral. He had won. He had secured his brand deal and cemented his status at the very top of Crestmont Academy's brutal food chain. But as Julian stared at the silver duct tape stuck to the linoleum floor, a strange hollow feeling washed over him. The victory didn't feel as sweet as he thought it would. He had successfully destroyed Ethan for the whole world to see. But he was entirely oblivious to the devastating karma that the universe was preparing to deliver. The gap between Julian's arrogant illusion and Ethan's heartbreaking reality was about to violently close by Saturday morning. Julian's video had hit 500,000 views. The streetwear brand officially signed him as an ambassador, sending a massive box of free merchandise directly to his sprawling, gated estate. Julian spent the entire morning unboxing premium hoodies and limited edition sneakers, arranging them meticulously on his king-sized bed for another post he was riding. The ultimate high of superficial success. The brutal hallway encounter with Ethan was already a distant, irrelevant memory, completely overshadowed by the influx of likes, comments, and free gear. But reality has a funny way of piercing through illusions when you least expect it. That afternoon, Julian's mother abruptly pulled him away from his ring light and social media feeds. His Aunt Clara, who had been battling a severe autoimmune disease for months, had been suddenly admitted to St. Jude's Medical Center downtown. Julian's mother was frantic, demanding he put on a decent shirt and come with her to the hospital. Immediately, Julian hated hospitals. He hated the sterile smell of bleach, the quiet, depressing hallways, and the glaring reminder that money couldn't buy invincibility. As his mother rushed into Aunt Clara's room to speak with the specialists, Julian was left to aimlessly wander the 3rd floor, aggressively scrolling through his phone to distract himself from the grim environment. He found himself walking down a long, brightly lit corridor, completely detached from his surroundings, until he heard a sound that made him stop dead in his tracks. It was laughter, not the cruel, mocking laughter of the Crestmont cafeteria, but a bright, genuine ringing giggle of pure joy. It sounded so entirely out of place in a hospital that Julian instinctively lowered his phone and looked up. He was standing outside the pediatric recovery ward. A large, soundproof glass window separated the hallway from a brightly painted playroom, where recovering children spent their afternoons. Julian stepped closer to the glass, peering inside. What he saw made the blood freeze entirely in his veins. There, sitting on a tiny, stained plastic yellow chair next to a hospital bed, was Ethan Caldwell. But this wasn't the broken, exhausted, humiliated boy from the hallway. This Ethan was radiating a brilliant, unshakable warmth. He was wearing his usual faded gray hoodie, but his face was completely transformed. He was smiling so widely that his eyes crinkled at the corners, making silly faces and holding the small, fragile hands of a little girl lying in the bed. The little girl, who couldn't have been older than 7, had a metal brace secured around her left leg. She was giggling hysterically as Ethan dramatically pretended to lose a thumb wrestling match. Against her, Julian was completely paralyzed. His mind short-circuited, trying to reconcile the image of the pathetic loser he had destroyed for clout with the joyful, deeply loving brother he was watching through the glass. Suddenly, a tall man in a white doctor's coat walked into the playroom, carrying a clipboard. Julian instinctively stepped back, pressing himself against the wall beside the open doorway, completely hidden from view, but close enough to hear everything. "All right, Maya, how are we feeling today?" the doctor asked warmly, checking the monitors next to the little girl's bed. "I beat Ethan at thumb wrestling 3 times, Maya announced proudly, her small voice echoing into the hallway. The doctor laughed, then turned his attention to Ethan. The doctor's expression softened into a look of profound, genuine respect. "Ethan," the doctor said gently, lowering his clipboard, "I wanted to give you the news personally before the billing department called. I processed the paperwork this morning. Because you worked all those extra night shifts at the warehouse these past 6 months, the final payment cleared." Inside the room, Ethan froze. The silly smile faded, replaced by a look of sheer, breathless anticipation. "You finally paid off Maya's entire physical therapy bill," the doctor confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "She's fully covered for the next 2 years of rehabilitation. You did it, son. You saved her leg." Ethan exhaled a shaky, massive breath, instantly dropping his head into his hands as a wave of overwhelming relief washed over him. Maya, sensing the shift in emotion, reached out and gently patted her brother's arm. "Thank you, Dr. Evans," Ethan choked out, wiping his eyes with the sleeve of his faded hoodie. "Thank you so much." "Don't thank me, Ethan. You're the one pulling double shifts after school," the doctor replied, patting Ethan's shoulder. The doctor then glanced down toward the floor, a frown creasing his forehead. "Speaking of which, Ethan, what happened to your shoe? Your left sole is completely ripped off. You can't be working in the warehouse like that. It's a safety hazard." Outside in the hallway, Julian's heart completely stopped. The air was violently sucked from his lungs. Through the crack in the door, Julian watched Ethan look down at his feet. The left shoe was exactly how Julian had left it in the hallway, ruined, flapping, and completely destroyed by the duct tape stunt. Ethan offered the doctor a tired, dismissive shrug, though his voice was completely devoid of anger. "It's fine, Dr. Evans," Ethan said quietly, tucking his ruined shoe under the plastic chair. "A kid at school thought it would be funny to rip it. It doesn't matter. Every single penny I earned went to Maya's fund. I didn't buy new ones because I needed to make sure she was safe first. I can handle walking on a torn shoe. I can't handle seeing her in pain." The words hit Julian with the devastating force of a freight train. "You're a good brother, Ethan. The best," the doctor said softly, before turning and exiting the room, walking right past Julian without noticing the wealthy teenager hyperventilating against the wall. Julian slowly slid down the cold, sterile wall of the hospital corridor until he hit the floor. The designer Apex Novas on his feet suddenly felt like lead weights, pulling him straight down into a suffocating pit of absolute shame. The viral video, the laughter, the duct tape, the brand deal, it all rushed back to him, but the filter of clout was completely ripped away. He hadn't exposed a loser. He had publicly humiliated and destroyed the only pair of shoes belonging to a boy who was sacrificing his own basic human comfort, his own sleep. his own dignity to save his little sister from being permanently crippled, while Julian was spending $3,000 on shoes to impress strangers on the internet. Ethan was taping his garbage shoes together so his sister could walk again. Julian pulled his phone out of his pocket with trembling hands. The screen was lit up with notifications. Hundreds of people were leaving laughing emojis on the duct tape video. Even the trash can wouldn't want them. Julian's own voice echoed in his head, mocking and cruel. The gap between his superficial world and Ethan's agonizing reality had violently closed, completely shattering Julian's ego. He squeezed his eyes shut, a hot, agonizing tear of pure regret slipping down his face. He had to fix this. He didn't know how, but he knew he absolutely had to fix this. Julian didn't remember walking out of the hospital. He didn't remember the elevator ride down or the walk through the parking garage. He just found himself sitting in the driver's seat of his pristine, leather-lined luxury sedan, staring blankly at the custom steering wheel. The silence inside the soundproof cabin was absolutely deafening. His phone vibrated violently in the center console. It was a notification from the streetwear brand's marketing director. Video just crossed 1 million views. Keep this energy up, kid. You're making us both a lot of money. Julian stared at the text message. A wave of intense, physical nausea washed over him. He opened his social media app and looked at the video. He watched himself strut down the hallway, wielding the duct tape like a weapon. He watched the absolute terror and humiliation flash across Ethan's exhausted face. He listened to the cruel laughter of his classmates. He wasn't a king. He was a monster. Without a single second of hesitation, Julian's thumb hovered over the screen and he hit delete. The video vanished. Years of carefully curated clout, the brand deal, the viral fame he'd wiped it all out in a single keystroke. Almost instantly, his phone began to ring. It was the marketing director, undoubtedly. Furious that their top-performing advertisement had just been scrubbed from the internet. Julian didn't answer. He powered the phone completely off, tossed it into the passenger seat, and gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white as he finally let the tears fall. But crying wasn't going to fix Ethan's ruined shoe, and it certainly wasn't going to make up for the hell Julian had put him through. Julian started the engine. He didn't drive back to his gated estate. Instead, he drove straight to his bank. He sat in the opulent lobby, waiting for the teller, his mind racing. Julian had a private savings account, entirely funded by his lucrative streaming revenue and generous allowance. It held just over $18,000 money he had been hoarding for 6 months to buy a custom diamond-encrusted Rolex and put a down payment on a sports car for his upcoming 18th birthday. "How can I help you today, Mr. Sterling?" the bank manager asked, recognizing Julian's high-net-worth profile. "I need to make a wire transfer," Julian said, his voice entirely steady, devoid of his usual arrogant drawl. "A direct medical donation to St. Jude's Children's Hospital for the Pediatric Rehabilitation Fund of Maya Caldwell," the manager typed into her computer, of course. "And what is the amount of the transfer?" Julian looked at his account balance on the screen. He thought of Maya's metal leg brace. He thought of Ethan's bruised, exhausted eyes. He thought of the duct tape stuck to the school floor. "All of it," Julian commanded, the heavy weight of his guilt demanding nothing less than absolute sacrifice. "Drain the account to zero." When Julian walked out of the bank an hour later, he had exactly $150 left in his wallet. He drove to a premium athletic store downtown and spent every last dollar on a pair of the highest quality, most durable, supportive sneakers they sold. No flashy logos, no limited edition hype, just absolute comfort and resilience. He spent Sunday in total isolation, ignoring frantic texts from Dax and Kaylin. When Monday morning arrived, the atmosphere at Crestmont Academy was thick with restless tension. The entire student body was buzzing with rumors. Julian Sterling had gone completely dark. His viral video was gone. The streetwear brand had publicly dropped him, and nobody knew why. At lunch, the cafeteria was packed to maximum capacity. The noise level was deafening as students argued over what had happened. Dax and Kaylin sat at the center table, looking completely lost without their leader hyping them up. Then the heavy cafeteria doors swung open. Ethan Caldwell walked in. The entire room went dead silent. The collective gaze of 300 teenagers snapping toward the doorway. Ethan froze, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He looked completely defeated. He was limping heavily, still wearing the destroyed left shoe because he truly had no other option. His exposed sock dragged against the linoleum. Floor. Ethan gripped his backpack straps, bracing himself for the onslaught. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the laughter, waiting for the trash to be thrown, waiting for the next viral stunt to completely destroy whatever tiny shred of dignity he had left. From the far side of the cafeteria, a chair scraped loudly. Against the floor, Julian stood up. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Dax pulled out his phone, a wicked grin spreading across his face. Assuming Julian was about to deliver the ultimate punchline to salvage his ruined brand deal. "Here we go," Dax whispered loudly, hitting record. Round 3. Julian ignored Dax. He stepped away from his table, carrying a large, sleek black box under his arm. He walked slowly, deliberately, straight down the center aisle of the cafeteria. The crowd parted for him, the tension in the room skyrocketing to an unbearable peak. Every single camera phone in the room was raised, recording his every move. Ethan opened his eyes and saw Julian approaching. Panic seized his chest. He took a painful step backward, his ruined shoe flopping uselessly. "Julian, please," Ethan begged softly, his voice shaking with sheer exhaustion. "I don't have anything left for you to take, just let me eat." Julian stopped just 2 feet away from Ethan. Julian didn't pull out his phone. He didn't raise his voice to project to the crowd. He just stood there, looking at the boy he had relentlessly tortured. With trembling hands, Julian stepped forward and gently placed the sleek black box directly onto Ethan's lunch table. Ethan stared at the box, completely bewildered. He looked up at Julian, waiting for a trap, waiting for a spring-loaded joke or a box full of garbage. "Open it," Julian said, his voice entirely stripped of its usual arrogance, replaced by a raw, profound sincerity that shocked everyone in earshot. Ethan hesitated, his hands shaking as he slowly reached out and lifted the lid off the box. Inside sat a brand new pair of premium ultra-supportive sneakers. But that wasn't what made Ethan's breath hitch in his throat. Resting on top of the fresh shoelaces was a folded piece of official bank paper. Ethan picked up the paper and unfolded. It was a receipt for a wire transfer. He read the destination: St. Jude's Children's Hospital, Maya Caldwell Rehabilitation Fund. He read the amount, $18,000, paid in full. Ethan's knees completely gave out. He grabbed the edge of the table to keep himself from collapsing to the floor, his wide, tear-filled eyes snapping up to meet Julian's, the absolute shock radiating from Ethan's face. This wasn't a prank. This was something entirely different. The cafeteria remained dead silent, the air heavy with an impending, earth-shattering realization, as Julian prepared to do the one thing he had never done in his entire life: admit he was wrong in front of the whole world. Ethan stared at the bank receipt, his vision completely blurring with hot, overwhelming tears. The numbers on the page didn't just represent money, they represented his life. They represented the grueling, back-breaking midnight warehouse shifts, the chronic exhaustion, the sheer terror of watching his little sister in pain, and the absolute humiliation he had endured to keep her safe. All of it, every single ounce of that crushing, suffocating debt was just ... gone. Julian, Ethan choked out, his voice barely a whisper as he looked up from the paper. I don't understand. What is this? Before Julian could answer, the silence in the cafeteria was abruptly broken by a loud, obnoxious laugh. Dax pushed his way through the crowd, holding his phone up high to record the interaction. "Oh, this is brilliant, bro," Dax howled, clapping Julian on the shoulder. "What's the punchline? Is the box full of actual garbage? Did you put raw meat in the shoes? Let's see the reveal, chat." The air in the room instantly turned toxic again as a few of Dax's followers snickered, anticipating another brutal takedown. Julian didn't laugh, he didn't smile. He turned to Dax, his expression harder and colder than anyone had ever seen it. With a swift, forceful motion, Julian slapped Dax's phone right out of his hand. It clattered violently against the cafeteria floor, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of cracked glass. "Shut up, Dax," Julian commanded, his voice echoing with absolute unyielding authority. "The cameras are off. The joke is dead." Dax stumbled back, completely shocked. The entire cafeteria gasped, stepping back as Julian turned his back on his former best friend and faced the crowd of hundreds of students who were still holding up their phones. "You all want a viral moment?" Julian yelled, his voice carrying to every single corner of the massive hall. "You want to know why Ethan was wearing duct-taped shoes? I'll tell you." He pointed directly at the ruined flapping sneaker on Ethan's foot. "While I was dropping $3,000 on shoes just to impress a bunch of strangers on the internet, and while all of you were laughing at him, Ethan was working double shifts at a warehouse until 3 in the morning every single night. He was wearing shoes falling apart at the seams because he was giving every single penny he earned to a hospital to pay for his 7-year-old sister's physical therapy, so she wouldn't be permanently crippled." A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the cafeteria. "I saw it with my own eyes this weekend," Julian continued, his voice cracking with the immense weight of his own guilt. "He didn't have new shoes because he sacrificed his own basic comfort, his sleep, and his dignity to save a little girl's life. He is 10 times the man any of us in this room are, and I tore his shoe apart for a brand deal." The cafeteria was paralyzed in a stunned, suffocating silence. The reality of Julian's words crashed down on the wealthy student body like a physical weight. One by one, the camera phones were slowly lowered. The students who had thrown trash, the kids who had offered him duct tape, the teenagers who had laughed, they all looked down at the floor, their faces burning with a profound, undeniable shame. Dax and Kaylin quietly slipped out the back doors. Unable to face the devastating truth, Julian turned back to Ethan. The arrogant, untouchable king of Crestmont Academy was completely gone. In his place stood a humbled, deeply remorseful boy. "Cancelled the brand deal. I deleted the videos," Julian said softly, looking Ethan directly in the eyes. "I drained my savings account to zero to pay off Maya's fund. That receipt is real. You don't have to work the night shifts anymore, Ethan. You can finally just sleep." Ethan's breath hitched in his throat. The sheer magnitude of the total erasure of his family's nightmare finally fully registered in his mind. He looked down at the sleek black box, then back up at Julian. "I can't pay you back for this," Ethan stammered, tears freely spilling down his cheeks. "You don't owe me a dime," Julian interrupted, his own eyes welling with tears. I owe you the biggest apology of my life. I was a monster to you, Ethan. I judged you by the outside because I was too shallow and empty to see what was on the inside. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know. I am so incredibly sorry." Julian stood there, entirely vulnerable, waiting for the anger, waiting for Ethan to throw the shoes at him, or scream at him for the torment he had caused, but Ethan Caldwell didn't possess an ounce of cruelty in his heart. Ethan let out a massive, shuddering breath, completely letting go of the heavy armor he had worn for the past 6 months. He stepped forward on his ruined shoe, reached out, and pulled Julian into a tight, brotherly embrace. The entire cafeteria erupted, but this time, it wasn't a roar of mocking laughter. It was a deafening wave of applause. The students clapped, some wiping tears from their own eyes, witnessing a moment of genuine, profound humanity that no viral video could ever capture. The aftermath of that day permanently altered the hierarchy of Crestmont Academy. Julian Sterling never wore his Apex Novas again. In fact, he sold the rest of his designer wardrobe and donated the proceeds directly to the pediatric ward at St. Jude's. He stopped chasing internet clout, entirely abandoning his superficial live streams. Without his toxic ego leading the way, his former friends Dax and Kaylin quickly faded into total irrelevance instead. Julian found a real friend. A few weeks later, inside the brightly painted pediatric recovery ward, Maya was sitting on the edge of her hospital bed, swinging her legs freely without the heavy metal brace. She giggled brightly as Ethan and Julian sat on the tiny plastic chairs next to her, enthusiastically arguing over the rules of a highly competitive thumb wrestling match. Julian was wearing a simple, unbranded white t-shirt and regular jeans. And as he laughed, genuinely and freely, he looked down at Ethan's feet. Ethan was wearing the premium, durable sneakers Julian had bought him, shoes that would last him for years to come. Julian had lost his viral fame, his brand deals, and his wealth, but as he watched Maya smile at her brother, he realized he had finally found his true worth. The moral and the lesson. So you see, making fun of someone might make you look cool for a second, but kindness leaves an impact for a lifetime. You never truly know the heavy battles someone else is fighting behind closed doors. When you judge someone strictly by what they wear or what they have, you blind yourself to who they actually are. Choose empathy over ego, because the ultimate measure of a person is never found in the price tag of their shoes, but in the size of their heart. If this story inspired you to look past the surface and choose kindness, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Comment down below, "I choose kindness." Thank you for watching, and always remember to change the world one heart at a time.